All right, guys, it's finally here. It's time to build the shop. I'm super excited about this. Working out of that small 2-car garage was great, but finally we're able to build something a lot larger. We're gonna go a bit bigger, so I'm super excited about this. This video is gonna cover pretty much everything from the beginning phases of design and planning, all of the paperwork that's needed for city permitting, and then also the actual layout of the shop, and then finally building the shop itself. We're gonna cover things like pricing, schedule, just the entire process. We're gonna cover everything. So let's talk about everything before you even plan on building your shop. And part of that is making sure that you're following local codes, local jurisdiction, and actually reach out to the entities that are in charge of your location. In my case, we have to get approval from the HOA as well as the city before we can actually start building this thing. However, long story short, we did have to move into this new property in order for me to build the shop because at the old house, the HOA did not allow for me to build the shop in the backyard, which kind of sucks because you guys know I did a lot of remodeling in that house. But moving on, every entity is going to have a list of requirements in terms of documents that you have to submit. For the city permitting, they're going to need the survey, the site plan, structure, foundation plan, structural framing plan, and that was practically pretty much what they requested for this project here. So I got the checklist, make sure I went through all the documents to see exactly what I needed to submit. And the first thing that I went ahead and did was to go and get a survey. They came out and they did the survey. What I asked for was all the property boundaries, all the easements and utility lines, as well as a survey of the existing building, which was my house at the time, and make sure that they included all of that into the documents. What's most important are the property lines as well as the easement line, because you want to make sure that the building is actually sitting on your property and not in an easement, because easements are there legally for other people to use, like the utility company, power company, and they're able to service that piece of the land whenever they need to. So you wanna make sure that your building is not blocking any of those easements and is actually on your property. Once the survey is done, the surveyor will give you a piece of paper showing you exactly where the property is. If you do have a CAD program like AutoCAD or SketchUp or some other drafting program, you can request for a digital file, and in that digital file, you can start planning your shop, your layout, your space. Once I got the documents in digital format, I can now then start planning for where this building is going to be, which we're gonna do right now on the iPad. Okay, so here is a site plan. If you guys are not familiar with it, it just gives you the boundaries, as well as you can see here in the blue line, that is all of the easement lines where you cannot technically build. So here I have my building with the existing driveway, as well as this existing shed here. So I made sure that they would include all of these information so I know exactly where I can build on the property. When I'm considering on where I want to place this building, I think about a few things. And one of those is sound. As we all know, wood shops, workshops, you can make a lot of noise in there. And the last thing you want is your neighbor calling the police on you because you're working late at night and you're making a lot of noise, they can't sleep. The other thing I have to consider is access. I want to be able to drive my truck and back it up towards the building if ever I need to unload lumber or load up a project for delivery. The last thing I want to consider is future expansions on my house here. I don't want to place the building in a way that will not allow me to expand, or at least it'll be harder to reconfigure this house in the future whenever we have more kids and we need to add on, you know, like a bigger master suite or something like that. So I'm considering those three things as the major factors. There's certain other factors in terms of costs and building elevations, but those are very minor. Now that I have those factors in mind, I can go ahead and start play with where I think the building should be. The first thing that I thought of was actually just to put it right here next to the existing building. And by doing that, I can create a driveway access, as well as there's this nice space here between the two houses where it could be like a seating area or something like that. And there's plenty of room in the back for future expansion of this house. The downside with this is my neighbor's house is really right up against that fence line there. And I know for a fact his bedroom is like somewhere over here. We also have another building on this side, but their bedroom is on the opposite side of their property. So there's sort of like a garage living room area here. And then my neighbors on this side, they're well about maybe 100 foot away, so sound won't be an issue on that side there. So placing the building here is a little bit too close to the neighbors over here. So I think this one is not going to work really well, although I do like the quick access there. My other thought was to place the building down here in this corner. That would give me some room to expand the house if I need to. There's still a longer driveway access all the way here, and there's still plenty of room for outdoor spaces. The one thing about this layout is we're going to have to demo that existing shed. That's about a $3,000 to $4,000 shed there. I'm gonna have to pay somebody to actually come out and demo it. So I have to put more money into that. And it's still pretty close to that building there. The other thing I don't like about this layout is it sort of divides the two outdoor spaces into separate sections. I want there to be more of a continuous flow between the two. However, since sound is my main focus and not bothering the neighbors, I don't think this is gonna work. And the last area where I thought that this could be is really up against this back corner here. So since it is up against this corner, it's further away from this neighbor, and I don't have any issues with this neighbor. Also, we do have this nice driveway access point, which is good. I can simply back up the car there. And I do like how there is a outdoor space that could be provided between the two buildings. And also I can still have some expansion space on the house here if we need to, like if we need to do a master suite, making it longer this way or adding it to it this way. Just some options that are available, which I think it looks pretty good. You know, I think this might work in terms of sound, in terms of future expansion, and in terms of access. My site is relatively flat, so I don't really have to worry about different elevations, hills, or whatever. Working on higher elevations, you have to think about earthwork costs, and that could be a big factor in your total budget. You have to like level out the site or at least bring up ramps or whatever to get to the actual building if it's a little bit higher, or if it's lower, how are you going to level out the site so that things are properly drained, or you know, you're not going down a really steep hill or something like that. Luckily where I'm at, things are relatively flat. I don't have to worry about rescaping the earthwork to make this building work. If I were building an addition to the house, then I would consider noise as an even more important factor, because sometimes I do work late at night and I don't want to have my wife or my kids wake up because of the noise that I'm making. If I were to do an addition, then I would probably expand it out this way instead. That way from my living room area, I can have quick access to and from that space. We don't have a garage, we do have a carport out here, so it's a quick access from the carport to that space, to that workshop if I need to. The other thing that I would consider even more would be, how do I control the sound between the spaces? For that, we would have to look at the STC value of a wall assembly. STC stands for Sound Transmission Class. It's the rating that is given to a wall assembly to determine how well it reduces the sound from one room entering into another room. So on a typical wall that we have in our house here, wood construction, 2x4, 16-inch on center with a layer of gypsum board on each side, you're looking at about an STC value of 30 to 32. 32 at the higher end. If I have let's say a 90 decibel machine running on one side, it's going to, there's a lot of science into it, but a good rule of thumb is the STC value of the wall assembly, if it's a 32, is going to reduce the amount of sound by 32 decibels. So on this side, it will be measured at 58 decibels. So that's just a good rule of thumb. Of course, there's some other factors like penetrations in the wall, like outlets, any leakage along that wall, like a door or something like that, that will affect the STC value or how well that wall works. I don't want to go into the details of it. There's a lot that we can talk about. If your workshop is going to be attached to your house, definitely look at STC value and think of ways of increasing that STC value by making that wall a little bit thicker. Instead of using 2x4s, maybe use 2x6, maybe you use stagger stud, which is very typical in hotel designs. What you don't want to focus on, and I think a lot of people have this misconception of how to keep sound from going from one room to the other, they often look at acoustical panels, and that doesn't really do anything with sound transmission. Acoustical panels, all it does is it reduces the reverberation within a room. It's similar to adding a rug onto like your wood floors or tile floors. It's going to dampen the sound. Adding in a couch or adding in some type of drapery on the windows, that has nothing to do with sound transmission. That has a lot to do with sound reduction, which is the NRC rating. NRC stands for Noise Reduction Coefficient, and that measures how well a material absorbs sound. So just want to give a little bit of my thoughts on this. If you are doing a building addition, look at the SCC value of your wall assembly that's attached to your house. You can look at the NRC value if you're thinking about doing voiceover recordings inside your workshop for YouTube or whatever. If you're a content creator, NRC is important. But if you're looking at sound transmission, don't really look at NRC because that doesn't really do much. So that's pretty much all of the site planning that is needed for my property here. So my site is very easy, very straightforward. There's not much that I have to think about other than these building lot lines on the side here, and then this 20-foot easement in the back. And that's pretty much site planning for this project. So now that I have the general idea of where the building is going to be and the general size that we're looking at, I'm going to take that information and get some rough estimates on how much this building is going to cost. My budget for this entire building is $30,000. The early stage of estimating is going to come back as a cost per square foot, depending on what type of building you're going to build. In my case, I looked at 3 different types of building. One is your traditional stick frame building. The other one is a pole barn. And the last one is a prefabricated metal building. Without that initial cost estimate, you don't have an idea of what direction you're going to take the building. So in my case, I got those 3 estimates. The first one was the stick frame, and that came in at about $75,000, which is including the interior finish, insulation, exterior siding, a couple of windows, shingle roof, and a garage door and a pedestrian door. So very basic construction, nothing too fancy. And then the pole barn came in at about $47,000, but that does not include the interior finishing. It does include insulation, and it doesn't include the interior slab that needs to be poured. It only includes the footings for the columns and also the siding and roofing. And then the last one, which is the prefab metal building, which is what I'm going to go with, costs only $12,000 for the building. However, that $12,000 does not include the interior finishing, so all of the drywall, all of the insulation is not included. It only includes the shell, the exterior, as well as the roof. Pretty much a very bare bones type of building. The plus side with these pre-manufactured metal building is the engineering is practically done for you. The building itself has already been approved and sealed off by the manufacturer's engineer, so you don't really need to hire a separate engineer for that. In most cases, these manufacturers do not design the foundation. You may find some that do, but in my case, they do not. So I need to hire an engineer to do the actual foundation design. And that costs about, for me, $500. Now, if you're building an addition to your house, that's a different question, a different set of engineering requirements, and a different set of code. But in this case, I'm not building an addition. I'm just building a freestanding metal building. And I chose this route because the requirements were so minimal. I didn't really have to do much documentation or paperwork. It was the most cost-effective way. The other factor that I looked at was how quickly can this building get built. With stick frame, it's a little bit longer. You're probably taking a couple of weeks to actually get it done because all the materials and all the trades that's involved. With the post frame or the pole barn, it's gonna take a couple of weeks, more trades, more people involved. That's gonna take a little bit of time. However, with the prefab metal building, they told me they can get this building up in 1 day. The entire building in 1 day. That's crazy. And the concrete guys, they said they can get the concrete done in about 3 days, which is awesome. That means I can get this entire thing built in less than a week. Now that I have the location of the building, as well as the size of the building determined and what type of building I'm going to go with, I can send all that information over to the engineer so that they can start designing the foundation. The manufacturer already knows what building that I'm going to go with, and they already have their documents ready. I just need to purchase the building, and they can send over the documents for me to submit to the city. Usually with the structural engineer that designs the foundation, what they're going to need is the building size, how big this building is, because you want to make sure that the foundation fits the building, right? If you're going with a kit building like I did, then usually their engineer will be able to provide all the information so that you can send it to the structural engineer for your foundation. So while I wait for the foundation design to be done, I can go ahead and start looking at the most exciting part, which is designing the shop. Putting all the tools where it needs to be, thinking way ahead. You can finally just see all those pieces being put together, see how the shop's gonna look, all the space that I'm gonna get. Yes, I'm super excited about that. So right now we're gonna use the iPad again, walk you through what I'm thinking about. All right, so let's dive into the actual layout of the workshop. I went through many different iterations of this. We're talking about like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different iterations of the workshop because I wanted to fine tune everything to make sure it was perfect right out the door. Of course, I know that once I'm in the space, once the building is done and some of the tools are in place, I can finesse things here and there, but I want a general idea or a direction for how I want the shop to be laid out. This is the very first layout, and a lot of it has to do with centering around the most important tools and trying to minimize the distance between each tool that I would need to walk to. The idea here is this would be my main work area between the tools. I have workbench, jointers, table saw, the drum sander, planer, and it's a very short distance between these two areas here, which is the router table as well as the dust collection. Ideally, I want the dust collection near the opening of a door or something like that. So the opening, I have it here, and it's an easy walk to empty out that dust collector if I ever need to. And then also, I want to utilize most of this clearance space as much as possible. The clearance space for the drum sander and the planer, it actually extends out of the workshop, as well as this jointer extends out of the workshop there. So I'm pushing some of that space outdoors, which is great because I can then utilize more of the space on the interior for other things. And what I like to do visually is I like to plot out where these dead spaces are, which is essentially the space that I feel is needed for that tool if I were to operate it. So things like where you're standing, things like the outfeed side, how much clearance you have there, your jointer, the space in front, as well as the wings on the side to feed the material through. So I want to overlap all of these spaces as much as possible without cramming it too close together. So that's my general thought process whenever I'm laying out the tools. And also I'm considering human comfort. And I feel like this is a big topic that we don't really talk about much when it comes to laying out our tools. We try to stuff everything in there as close as possible because we want more tools to be in the space, which is great, you know, nothing wrong about it. However, if you're moving within a space and you're not comfortable working in it, then it starts to be a little bit, you know, of a nuisance. You start to become less efficient if you can't move things around comfortably. So what I did is between two workbenches, I made sure that I gave myself about 3 feet of working space. So 3 feet is very comfortable for a single average sized person, right? If you're built a little bit bigger, then of course give yourself a little bit more room. If you're smaller, then yeah, you could probably make it less than 3 feet. But on average, whenever we're designing buildings, whenever we're designing a space, when we think of human comfort, then we're looking at a 30-inch circle. That's going to give us roughly about a 6 square foot area, which is perfectly comfortable for one person standing around. It really is depending on you and what your level of comfort is. So that's the driving factor for how I'm laying things out. Human comfort, as well as efficiently laying out these clearance spaces so I'm not wasting so much space. So this is the first layout, and I went through all the iterations, and I'm just gonna go and jump to the final iteration, which is this one right here. The way that I divided the interior space is part of the workflow process that I have for my shop. First is to break down the materials. So as I pull up the truck, I can stop by this zone here, which is where the miter saw station will be located. I can break down all my lumber. I can take my sheet goods and I can store it over here for the time being so that it has a close access to the CNC. I thought of doing this creative vertical storage here, which I'll talk more about later on as we build it. But that would be where my lumber storage would be. And I can break things down and just store it right there where it needs to be within reach. I do also have my spray finish booth here. Since it is close to the exterior, I can take that spray cart, roll it out, and do my finishing outdoors if I need to, or I can sort of create a enclosed space with maybe curtains or something like that, and do the spraying here. So some flexibility there, but that's mainly the lumber breakdown station. That's what I call it. So that's the first station. Coming from this first zone, I have the second zone, which is processing that rough stock into finalized lumber sizes that I need. So that is zone 2, which has my jointer, my table saw, my sled, outfeed table, router, some lumber storage there, and a router table here. So I have two router tables there. This is where I'm going to process the materials. These tools is my main go-to tools to get things down to the right thickness, the right size, width, length, or whatever. I do have the planer and drum sander here, as well as the bandsaw in this zone, because I think with a drum sander, it's more like a fine finish type of tool. The planer, of course, you can mill things down to rough stock, but you can also get very detailed with that, as well as the bandsaw. So it's sort of like this overlap between the second zone as well as the finishing zone, which is my assembly table and workbench. So that area is well within walking distances between the two, which brings me to this final zone, which is the overall assembly storage workstation area. My assembly table is the heart of the workshop. It's where I pretty much put things together, and between the assembly table, I can access the table saw, my workbench, and all of these storages there, the storage organization there, my clamp rack on that side, refining my material here on the planer, the drum set, and the bandsaw. So it's sort of the center of everything. It allows me to get to these other areas very quickly. When it comes to storage, I'm going to have the entire wall of storage here. I'm going to have some storage here that are built in. We'll have quick access to all of that from this central location. Now the CNC is placed in the back here because usually when I'm working the space, the CNC is doing its own thing. The lumber storage will have my sheet goods, and I can all easily load up the sheet goods onto the CNC. And then if I do need to work with hardwood lumbers, all of that lumber storage is there, and I can quickly move it to the CNC from that area. So I do like how this is laid out. I think this is going to be very efficient. I'll remove that layer so you can kind of check out what we're working with. I think at the end of the day, this is going to be pretty much perfect for my workflow and for the tools that I have. Those are the things that I considered whenever I laid out the shop. Human comfort, being able to move around comfortably and work around the space comfortably. Making sure that the clearances are overlapped in a way that makes sense and I'm utilizing the space efficiently. And 3, making sure that I am minimizing the amount of steps that is needed to go between each of the tools. So that is pretty much it, guys. That's what we're going to stick with. All right, so I think that's where I'm going to leave it off at. I went through many different designs, and I feel like this last one is going to be perfect. There's a lot of space for expansion in the future. When we get that 4x8 CNC, we're not going to get it immediately. Really big ticket item. With that big purchase, I want to make sure that I'm going to the right manufacturer for it. I do have a few in mind, but that's going to be a video for the future. However, for now, I can utilize that space for assembly, for whatever I need finishing. It's just a very big multi-use space because I've already allocated enough space for the majority of my tools that I'll be using on a day-to-day basis. And there's plenty of space for the finishing and assembly already. All of this extra space is just bonus for now. When you're planning out this layout, spend as much time as possible. Think through all of the iterations. Think through every single nook and cranny where things need to be and be intentional about it. But at the same time, don't be so rigid so that you can't expand later on. You can't move things around. In my case, I know how I work, and that is if I set a tool down, it's never going to get moved, or at least it's barely, ever, rarely going to get moved to a new location. And if it ever does get moved, it's because we're expanding shop. So I want to make sure that I get it right the first time. That way I don't have to think about redoing my ductwork, redoing all of my electrical, adding in a new outlet in this place because we have to move the table saw 10 foot over or something like that, and now the plug doesn't reach anymore. So think about it carefully, go through the different iterations, and make sure in the end you cover all your bases in terms of your clearances, in terms of future-proofing your shop, and also in terms of comfortability. We all know, we just love tools and we want to cram everything in there, but working in a comfortable space is just as important as the tools that you're using. So now that I have an idea of all the tools and where it's going to be, and now that the structural engineer is done with their job, I can then go ahead and submit my documents to the city for permitting and wait. Well, of course, I'm not just literally twiddling my thumb and waiting for the city to send me back the permit. I'm going to take the documents that I have from the engineers. Since it's fully designed, everything is finalized, all the details are there. I'll take it to the general contractors for them to give me quotes on exactly how much this building is going to cost. And one tip that I recommend is make sure you vet your general contractor. Just don't go with anybody on the street. Make sure that they're insured, make sure that they have references, which is so important, especially in my area where you don't need a license to be a general contractor. That's right, where I live, you don't need a license at all. The last thing you want to do is hire somebody that has no idea what they're doing. You think that they're very cheap in the beginning, but they're going to cost you so much more money down the line. And you're going to end up spending more time managing them than focusing on your family and other things that matter for your business or for your life. So you want to vet them out as well, because if they don't include something in the plans, usually they're going to come later on and asking for more money because they didn't see it in the plans. And then you're in a position where you're kind of juggling, well, it's not my fault you didn't read in the plans, and I understand you need money to complete this job, and I'm kind of stuck with you for the time being. And yeah, you don't want to be in that situation. You want to make sure that you're properly vetting out all of your general contractors and kind of stick within that middle of the pack. So in my case, the building actually did come from the manufacturer, and they gave me the price in the initial phase of the design because I already gave them my specification in terms of what size I need, what building height and everything. So now that everything's planned, I got the permits in, we can finally start building this shop. Yes. The first part of the entire process was the guys came out and they started to do all of the earthwork, the groundwork, which was to take out a layer of the soil underneath, because in our area we have very clay soil and that's not good for foundation. They're going to take out a portion of it and fill it with select fill, which is something that they can compress. It's going to be a much more solid foundation to build upon, because that select fill is not going to move as much as clay soil. I have to say, these guys, they work incredibly efficient. They're super fast at what they do, and they're amazingly hardworking people. I have to really give it up to these guys in the trades, and that's why I love being in the trades, is you work with guys who just absolutely are hardworking, really awesome people, and these guys are just that. So if you do have a contractor or subcontractors that you work with, or who is working on your job, make sure you treat them well. Like just buy lunch for them. They really appreciate that. And in my case, that's what I did. I bought lunch for them every single day. And at the end, when they finished the foundation, we got together and we had a awesome lunch, a barbecue lunch. Definitely show appreciation to these guys because they work incredibly hard. It took them about a day to do all the earthwork and lay the perimeter boards for the foundation. There was a little bit more select fill that was needed to make sure everything was leveled. So the next day they came back with a load of dirt and filled up that area that was needed. And then they added the rebar, which was the last stage before we can actually call for inspection, which happened the following day. After the inspections were cleared, and in our case, we didn't have any issues at all, they can go ahead and pour it into concrete. And like I mentioned before, these guys work really, really hard and really, really fast. I didn't even get up in time for them to wait for me to do the actual video of them pouring the concrete. I actually came towards the end of the pour, so I didn't really get much of the video footage for that part of the work. So after a couple of hours, the guys came back and did the finishing on the concrete, and it was super smooth. I wanted to make sure that they had that smooth finish because eventually I did want to apply epoxy to the floors, and I didn't want it to have that texture of the broom finish. I also did this little special hand and footprint with my daughter and my son. It's a good reminder every single day when I walk through those doors. I'm reminded about why I'm doing this, why I'm building this business. Now that the foundation is done, I can go ahead and schedule in the actual building to get built. And those guys came in and literally, like they said one day, it took one day for them to finish, which was insane. Like, they worked fast. This building got put together so efficiently. All they had to do was drill anchors into the foundation, put up the main structure, and then clad everything in the metal cladding, add the roller doors, add the pedestrian doors, and that's practically it. That's amazing. I was very impressed. As they were working on the building, I went back to look at my budget and look at the other items that I wanted to include in the building. I thought about it again, and the interior I can probably do myself. I do, however, really want to do the spray foam now. Eventually we're going to include AC, so doing all that now before adding the finishing, it just makes sense to get it done. I ended up going with plywall interior for the wall finishing. The drywall cost was going to be about the same, so I went ahead and just did plywood because plywood is going to be better for me to mount things on compared to drywall, so it's just a no-brainer at that point, which meant that I have to go over budget for the electrical, the lighting, and the epoxy floors. To get the plywood in place, I screwed in some strips of 2x4 directly into the structure, and then the plywood was screwed onto that. We had a huge downpour over the weekend, and this is the one time I wish I had an all-wheel drive. Once the strips were in place, the plywood install went along fairly quickly. There were some areas where I needed to cut the panels narrower, but those were only in the corners. I did have to cut out areas around the roof brace since those were attached to the structure just below the 8-foot line. I used a laser level to try and keep all the screws centered on the wood strip and just to make sure that they were fairly level across the entire shop. It's not a huge deal, but at least it looks a lot cleaner. What I didn't get to record was the epoxy floors being poured since I was out of town when they did the work. I went with a white base coat with a polyaspartic glossy top coat. It's much more expensive than the DIY kits you see at the big box stores, and after installing that kit for my parents' garage, I definitely can tell that it wasn't going to last a very long time in the shop. So going with the polyaspartic finish, it's going to be much more durable long term. I know what you're thinking, that glossy white coat, it's going to be slippery, right? Well, after working in it for a few months now, I have no problems with slipping if I'm wearing my tennis shoes or my boots. There is some slippage if I wear my flip-flops, but that's because that flip-flop needs to be thrown out. It's really old and there's no grip left. Either way, I wear my tennis shoes and boots usually when I'm working in my shop, and it's perfectly fine. The glossy white coat definitely makes the space feel a lot brighter, which is why I chose to go with that. I also ran all of the electrical through the shop. There's nothing exciting about running the electrical, so I didn't feel like I needed to add to the video and make it a lot longer than it needs to be. Plus, if you're not comfortable wiring up your space, definitely hire somebody and save some headache down the line. Once I got the interior finished, minus the lights, I can then start moving the tools in. I'm so thankful for this engine hoist and for Andy who helped move everything over. It took a few trips and 2 days to get everything into the new space, and after seeing it all in place, it became a huge sigh of relief. Up until this point, we've been paying for 2 mortgages. That was a huge stress financially, so I'm glad all of this is done. With the major tools moved over, I started getting some of the items onto the wall, mainly the clamp rack and some finishing products. I do plan on having new wall storage made to better organize everything because in the previous shop, that was definitely a need that I never really got to. So in this space, I do want to make that more of an effort. And those will have their own individual videos, so make sure you click that subscribe button. Working in natural light is one of my favorite ways to work, but since this shop doesn't have large enough windows, I will definitely need to install lights. I went with American Green lights for the shop and I've been very happy with them. I'll have a separate video going over the install and my review of these lights coming soon. With the lights up, I ran the old dust collection pipes to all of the tools. The one thing I'm most excited about for the space is finally getting AC installed. It's super hot and humid in Texas, so this is going to be a much appreciated upgrade. I went with Pioneer 30,000 BTU system for the space since that's what they recommended. Full disclosure, they did send this one out to me in exchange for my opinion. However, I did look into other brands like Daikin and Mitsubishi since I'm more familiar with those brands in the commercial space, but they were much more costly and they didn't sell direct to consumer. I'm not familiar with Mysticool and none of the HVAC techs that I've spoken with ever installed them. They did mention Pioneer and Train though, so I reached out to Pioneer and that's when they sent me this unit. The installation was fairly easy. I mounted the brackets directly onto the metal structure, which is why it's a bit high. I can see how someone who is a DIYer could be confused with the installation manual that's included, since some of the sections didn't pertain to my specific unit. Also, I don't have the right HVAC tools and equipment to do a flush of the line and add refrigerant, since I didn't know that the unit is only pre-charged for a 25-foot connection. Mine was 50-foot. I asked a HVAC friend of mine to come and do the flush as well as add the refrigerant. I did have to buy the mounting brackets to have it mounted onto the wall, as well as the line cover kit separately since they don't come with the unit. I'll have a link down in the description below where I bought the cover kit since it's much cheaper than the name brand version. With all the systems installed, this metal box is now my woodshop. All right guys, so that's it. The shop is done and it's been done for a couple of weeks now. However, there's still some small things that I need to move around and I need to get in place. I'm going to do the final shop tour in a different video. At least I wanted to get some of these storage stuff up on the walls to make it look a little bit better for the shop tour. This has been a long process and I wanted to cover just a little bit on the total cost for everything. Initially, the budget was $30,000. The building came in about, at the end of the day, after taxes and fees, it was like 12,000 something and change, but I'm around up to 13,000. And then the foundation came in at $11,500. I got 2 inches of close-cell spray foam on the ceiling line as well as the walls, and that came in at $4,500. All of the electrical work I did myself, and materials on that was about $1,700. Copper is really crazy right now. And then the lighting came in at $2,000. The wood for the interior wall was $1,200 for that, and I did that myself. I also did the lighting myself as well. The epoxy floor, the white epoxy floor, came in at $3,500. I'll leave the total cost at the bottom. I know for sure I went over budget. But you know, it was an investment for me and I think this is going to help the business in the end. I wanted to just get it right. There's some other things that I wanted to do eventually is upgrade the dust collection. I want to go with metal pipes instead of PVC. It's going to work for now. However, I do want to upgrade that eventually down the line. I'll also include the cost for the permitting as well as all the engineering that was involved. It wasn't that much for my project, but I'll definitely include that in the total budget below. So appreciate you guys tuning in, watching the entire process. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments. If you're not into these big construction projects, I do have some woodworking projects here you want to check out. And if you are into the construction projects and renovations, check out this playlist over here for all of the renovations that I've been doing. Until next time, guys, this is Bao Design Craft Workshop. See ya.